television, live on our Facebook page, but also on YouTube. In case you're wondering, this is the launch of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, a report on the state of the economy in Malawi, presented to us, or presented to this nation by the World Bank Group. Now, we anticipate this will be an extension from the 11th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, which was titled From Crisis to a Strong Recovery. That report, you will recall, sometime back in July 2020, we were also here in studio here live, bringing you what COVID-19 has done to the economy and the World Bank proposing solutions to key challenges that the nation faces. We are here to find out if we have recovered, if we are recovering, and the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitors, like we will hear in a moment live in the studio, will share with us more about doing more with less, improving service delivery in energy and water. World Bank picking up two critical sectors of the economy, energy and water. We'll find out more. There will be a very brief welcome remarks from a reigning World Bank country representative, Javier Zuleta, and we will also have presentations of the report, the actual report, by two very conversant presenters joining us live from across the borders. They will join us live here for their presentation of the report, and then shortly after that we shall go into a panel discussion. I have in studio a panel, a high-powered panel of 3 experts to try and dissect into this report. My name is Daniel Malawa. Welcome, and this is Zodiak. Without so much ado, I'm now joined in studio by World Bank Acting Country Manager for Malawi, Javier Zuleta. Welcome to Zodiak, and welcome to Malawi.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you all to the dissemination of this 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, MEM. Doing more with less, improving service delivery in energy and water sectors. This edition of the MEM focuses on maximizing the potential of energy and water sectors. It proposes means in which service delivery in this sector can be improved, as well as increasing infrastructure investment. Overall, it seeks to show how Malawi can do more with less, taking into consideration the current domestic burden, limited fiscal space, which have been worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of you are aware that Malawi is still grappling with the effect of COVID-19 pandemic, which has heavily affected economic activity. The economy is projected to grow by only 1% for 2020. With population growth of 3%, this means that GDP per capita would decrease 2%. Looking forward for the next year, the MEM projects that Malawi economic growth will rebound to 3.3%. However, the nature of the recovery will depend on the evolution of the COVID-19 pandemic, the gradual containment of the global pandemic, and continuing low case number in Malawi could support a rebound of the service and industry sectors, and a good agricultural season is also projected to support the rebound of the economy. We are aware that the slowdown of economy activity has had a heavy impact on the government finances, which were already constrained due to the considered domestic debt burden. Revenues have declined, while expenditure pressures have increased, including in response to the pandemic. In the short term, our recommendations are that the government should continue with efforts in 4 areas. First, it needs to continue with the current efforts to contain the epidemic. This includes expanding the testing, ensuring the access to essential care for COVID-19, and investing in mechanisms to support home-based isolation and care. Secondly, carefully targeted response efforts are needed to support the most vulnerable, particularly with emergency cash transfer in affected urban areas. Thirdly, we need to further ensure regular monitoring on the trade and market situation in order to address potential blockage of food, markets, and trade. Finally, it should assess extending the ongoing moratoria on debt service for bank lending, considering balancing access to credit with financial markets stability. In the midterm, the recommendations you will see should seek to implement measures to boost economy recovery and build resilience in Malawi to return to the 5 to 5.5% of growth rate. Higher growth will be needed if we want to reduce poverty levels, increase job creation on the midterm. To do so, the government should implement measures in 3 broad areas. First, the government can strengthen the foundation of macro stability and growth. It will need to strengthen fiscal sustainability, reduce domestic debt to create a strong foundation for growth. This will call for hard choices in terms of expenditure priorities. It can also strengthen public financial management and governance in order to improve the reduced limited public resources. And that requires the strengthening the financial oversight and transparency in SOEs, state-owned enterprise, to reduce fiscal risk and improve service delivery. Secondly, the government can support diversification in agriculture and non-agricultural sectors to increase incomes and resilience. It can do this by adopting predictable and transparent policies which could support diversification and commercialization in the agriculture sector. Rebalancing spending in the agriculture sector to ensure that it's fiscally sustainable and promote diversification. Thirdly, the government can strengthen systems to support the vulnerable and increase resilience through developing shock-sensitive safety net systems. This can help mitigate the impact of the current pandemic and also future shocks. But let me focus a little bit on the specific topic of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, which is how to strengthen service delivery in energy and water. As you know, Malawi suffers for inadequate access to and reliability of energy, water, and other infrastructure services. This slows growth, poverty reduction, and worsen health outcomes. As Malawi have the lowest electrification rates in one of the lowest electrification rates in the world, 11% only, and Malawian can access to water only at the level of 67%. This situation is exacerbated by high population growth, decreasing water resources, aging infrastructure, inefficiency of water boards, creating large gaps between supply and demand, leading to unreliable services. We have also a combination with a lack of fiscal space and inefficiency of SOE have led to underinvestment in energy and water. SOEs responsible for energy for those services are performing poorly. There is a lack of resources to make adequate investments, and they have a relatively poor cash flow that leave little room for much needed investment to properly operate and maintain existing infrastructure or commercial borrowing. These challenges are not without solution, while government has already started to implement the required reforms in many SOEs recently were announced, measures have been taken, additional actions are required to improve infrastructure investment and service delivery. The public investment management framework should be strengthened, and institutional aspects should be addressed. This will help to ensure better and more efficient project prioritization and selection, improve project design and implementation, and minimize delays and cost overruns in investment. There is also a need to improve efficiency in procurement. For projects deemed suitable for PPP implementation, they can leverage private sector efficiency and project implementation. The government can also ensure SOE are more efficient and creditworthy. This could help increase investment in existing and new infrastructure and minimize the drain on government finances. This can be addressed by improving the financial and operational performance as well as governance in SOEs. In closing, I will look forward to the discussion today. Malawi currently faces a range of critical issues, we know that, and we're excited to play our role in supporting Malawi to deliver better service to the citizen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was Javier Zuleta, Acting Country Manager for Malawi for the World Bank, and quite intriguing thoughts that you're sharing. I know our viewers are also intrigued to find out more what's contained in the report. But taking it from the 11th edition, you know, from crisis to a strong recovery, and now we are saying doing more with the little or the less that we have. Have we recovered?
Well, in spite of this difficult year, the pandemic and all changes faced by Malawi, we have a new administration now that requires time and efforts. There is a learning curve in the administration, new people coming. We have seen that there are a clear indication of progress, and as you have seen, we have mentioned, even if during 2020 the economic growth will be minimal, for next year we expected 3.3, which is good, and also apparently we will have a good harvest. Also we have rain, so the situation appears to be positive, and we have a government taking action in many sectors.
And then you did refer to the fact that it's time for hard choices.
Yeah.
Is that an admission to the amount of resources that we have?
Yes, because the finance in the government are really under stress because the expenditures have increased a lot. We have seen that since July, during the peak of the pandemic, the economic activity went down drastically. So that consumed resources from the government, and the fiscal space for doing more and new things and new investment is limited. But it is a good time for making better planning and prioritization, more discussion, open discussion, public discussion about the priorities. It's a good time for the country.
Javier, thank you so much for making time to join us.
Okay,
that was Javier Zuleta, Acting Country Manager for the World Bank here in Malawi, welcoming remarks for this memorable day. It's the launch of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor by the World Bank here in Malawi. It is titled Doing Less, Improving Service Delivery in two critical sectors, like I said, energy and water. Like I indicated, we'll move on to the next session. We'll take a very short break, and up next is now a presentation of the report. We have two key experts to unpack or unveil the report to you and me today. These two experts senior country economist for the World Bank here in Malawi. That's Patrick Hettinger. Those of you that followed the one in July, he was in studio. He made the presentation here in studio. He will be joining us virtually today, and I know Patrick can hear us. Welcome, Patrick. And after him, he will be joined by Nima Mwingu, who is a senior financial sector specialist. So our two presenters are joining us virtually to present the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor by the World Bank. Please do stand by.
Malawi faces an infrastructure investment gap in the energy and water and sanitation sectors of approximately $332 million per year. What are the pathways to increase investments in energy and water infrastructure in Malawi? Join us as we launch the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, Doing More with Less, Improving Service Delivery in Energy and Water. Catch us on Tuesday, December 15, 2020, live on Zodiak Television, Zodiak Online, and on YouTube at exactly 3 p.m. Live in our studios will be Dr. Max Wenga, Deputy Director for Planning in the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources, Lauren Nyasulu, President of Economics Association of Malawi, ECAMA, and Joseph Kalowekamo, Deputy Director of Alternative Energy in the Ministry of Energy. Doing more with less, improving service delivery in energy and water. Malawi faces an infrastructure investment gap in the energy and water and sanitation sectors of approximately $332 million per year. What are the pathways to increase investments in energy and water infrastructure in Malawi? Join us as we launch the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor.
All right, welcome back to the launch of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor by the World Bank here in Malawi. You just heard from the acting country manager, Mr. Javier Zuleta. Like I indicated, we are now joined by two esteemed specialists. Joining us live from New York in the United States is a senior country economist for the World Bank, Patrick Hettinger. And Nima Mwingu, senior financial sector specialist. Nima joins us from Nairobi. We're just trying to check if Patrick is there. Patrick, can you hear me? Yes, Patrick. Patrick, can you hear me? Let's try Nima. Nima Mwingu is in Nairobi, Kenya. Nima, are you able to follow and hear me?
We've said we're discussing today the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor. We'll be discussing how Malawi can do more with less.
Well, our technicians are still trying to get them connected, but I indicated two of them. Patrick Hettinger joining us live from New York virtually to make a presentation of, these are fruits of COVID-19. People can make virtual presentations from all across the world. We have Patrick joining us from New York, and Nima Mwingu joining us live from Nairobi, Kenya, to present matters of state here in Malawi, the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor by the World Bank. Shall we try again to check if we have Patrick and Nima?
They're in Africa, and for Malawi's key trade partners as well, they've all seen a strong impact. The U.S., Euro area, South Africa, they're all expecting a substantial contraction in growth this year. And even China, there's been a drop in growth. And we see activity stalling again as second waves hit across the world. The pandemic has also had a substantial impact on international commodity prices, where oil plunged substantially. This impact in terms of Malawi's trade partners, where exports, particularly from South Africa, fell by about 60% year on year in April and May at the height of the lockdown in South Africa. And since then, they've gradually normalized so that by August, September, October, it's back at the previous levels from last year and even slightly above those levels. So looking towards Malawi, this is where we've seen the international impact on imports, where in April and May, imports were down by about 26 to 27% from the previous year. Since then, there's been some signs of normalization with July doing well, and then again, October, November, imports are again above where they were last year. We've also seen a substantial impact on remittances, where overall through October, they're down by about 30% from the year before. And this is quite clearly in April, June, and July. And it looks like there was some rebound in these in August and September quite strongly, but again, October figures were weak again. So overall, those are down and having an impact on incomes. So looking at the impact on growth, that's where we've seen a substantial impact on services, and we're expecting a contraction there. And this is due to the travel and accommodation. International tourism has been a survey held in June at the height of case numbers in Malawi. It was the highest number of firms that were showing less than 50% capacity utilization in recent years. And so that's showing a strong impact. This has been offset to some extent by a strong agricultural harvest, though. So where maize production was up by about 13%, which has helped quite a bit with food security and the overall economic situation, although tobacco production was down. But so due to this overall, we're forecasting an estimating growth of only about 1% in 2020. And looking at this on a per capita level, that's where this would be a contraction of 2% per capita. So that on the whole, people are actually, per capita incomes are decreasing. And this is where this builds on how over the last 2 decades, Malawi's had a relatively high poverty rate that has stagnated at the international $1.90 per day threshold at about 73%. And it's only improved by about 3 percentage points over the last 15 years. And that's in contrast to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, where first, poverty rates overall they've also decreased quite a bit over the last 15 years. So when we approach poverty. Besides, to some extent, we've seen less of a labor market impact in Malawi than in some other countries, where the overall impact here has been somewhat less than in some other African countries, and this could possibly be due to the large share of the workforce in agriculture in Malawi, which has been, as we mentioned, much less affected. However, overall, we have seen a considerable impact on human capital development, where particularly the poor have had less access to education during the shutdown. So looking at inflation, that's where we've seen a substantial decline from 11.5% in December 2019 to about 7.5% in October. This has been as food prices have broadly declined over that period, as well as global oil prices also contributed to this. Yet in the last couple of months, we've started to see food prices pick up again, following seasonal patterns with maize, as households deplete their stocks and look to the market for increasing demand for maize. So looking at the fiscal side, that's where we've seen in FY 19-20, the overall deficit expanded to about 9.4% of GDP. And this was due to several reasons. Were substantial causes, which were due to overly optimistic of the also election-related expenditure, higher interest payments, as well as expenditure related to pandemic response. But this is where we saw a substantial impact in the third quarter and also the fourth quarter. So that overall it reached the highest deficit in recent years at 9.4%. Looking to this current fiscal year, the FY 2021, we're expecting to see the deficit widen further. And again, this is due to several causes. Revenues are reducing. Domestic revenues are projected to decline from about 18.9 to 17.5%. This is due to both lower growth as well as tax policy changes, such as the increasing the pay-as-you-earn zero-income monthly threshold from about 45,000 kwacha to 100,000 kwacha. And so we've also already seen in the first quarter that revenue has underperformed, and this is even before this change in the pay-as-you-earn policy takes effect. We're also seeing this come on the expenditure side, where the AIP is quadrupling expenditure on agricultural input subsidies from 0.6 to 2.4% of GDP, which is increasing the fiscal burden there. We've also seen interest costs increase dramatically by about 4%. Expenditure increase substantially from about 5.3 to 7.6% due to some projects in energy and water. But overall, the deficit, we're expecting it to be about 12.4% of GDP, which is very high. And what is also quite critical is that of this, 8.7% is expected to be financed by domestic borrowing, which is at a very high cost. And so that's where we see here that public debt overall has increased considerably just between 2019 and 2020 from about 59% to 65% of GDP. And this is driven by domestic borrowing, which is increasing from about 30% of GDP to 37% of GDP just in the past year. Because at the same time, external borrowing is actually decreasing slightly. And here on the right, where we see the impact of this on fiscal space, where this is the impact of how much of revenue and grants is spent on debt service alone, and it's increased to over 35% of revenue and grants is spent on interest payments. So this isn't supporting a development agenda, but it is just supporting interest payments. And so this is a considerable impact on fiscal space and increasing the fiscal burden. We've seen domestic borrowing continue, where's the risk of crowding out private sector borrowing in the future. We've also seen in recent months, since July, the kwacha has depreciated by about 3.3% since July. And this is helping reduce the level of real appreciation, which in the medium term should help improve Malawi's competitiveness. We've also seen in November that the RBM, Monetary Policy Committee, reduced interest rates with the monetary policy rate going down from 13.5 to 12.0%, which should support lending growth. Yet, as we mentioned, interest rates here on the right remain very high, and they've increased substantially since January by about 500 basis points. So that this is again increasing the fiscal burden on government. Looking at the broader financial sector, up to now, it has remained fairly healthy. NPLs remain fairly low, and liquidity levels remain sound as well. And in terms of borrowing levels overall, we did see a drop in July, down to about 5.2%. But in September and October, it partially rebounded again to about 16.9% growth. So that it's lower, but it has shown some signs of rebound there. But so looking to the macro outlook, that's where we're this will still need to increase even further to actually impact and substantially impact poverty levels. Expecting inflationary pressures could emerge for food and non-food, which again could affect food security and potentially poverty as well. Expansionary fiscal policies are increasing debt levels, which are increasing interest payments as a share of fiscal space. And at the same time, the current account deficit is projected to remain at a high level around 19% of GDP. So what can Malawi do about this? In the short term, the government has limited fiscal space to act, like we've said, but it should first continue with the current efforts to contain the pandemic, including testing. Second, it should see what it can do to continue efforts to support the most vulnerable through cash transfers to those affected in urban areas. And then third, it can also look at monitoring the trade and market situation in order to address potential blockages that could occur, especially as we head into the lean season, to avoid spikes in food prices. And then fourth, they can also look at assessing the ongoing moratorium on debt service for bank lending, where we'll have to carefully balance access to credit with financial market stability and how to increase access for MSMEs. But then looking at the medium term, the government has measures it can do to boost recovery and resilience, expectations for macro stability and growth. And that's where there's a strong need to strengthen fiscal sustainability and reduce domestic debt so that there is room for the economy to thrive. And so that's where, while fiscal accommodation in the short term would support recovery, in the medium term, deficits do need to decrease so that the government can reduce debt service costs and increase the fiscal space for investment. And that's where it needs to look at prioritizing expenditure within realistic revenue envelopes. And it will have to make hard choices about what to fund. It should also step up the scrutiny of development expenditure in this to ensure that development expenditure is justified by high borrowing costs. And that's where they have actually taken some strong steps in this in recent months already. Beyond this as well, it can strengthen PFM governance to make more efficient use of limited resources. And it can also look at strengthening financial oversight and transparency of SOEs, as we'll discuss more in the special topic. As a second broader area, it can support economic diversification in agriculture and non-agriculture sectors to increase incomes and resilience. And so that's where it can look at adopting predictable and transparent policies to support diversification and commercialization in agriculture. And this is looking at implementing the KOGA and to reduce ad hoc imposition of export bans, as well as directing funding in agriculture. At the same time, the government can address structural issues that hinder diversification outside of agriculture, which would support broader economic diversification. And so that's looking at strengthening the energy and water sectors, investing in energy generation, as well as simplifying taxation and regulation so that it can reduce ad hoc changes and support value addition in key growth enabling sectors. And finally, the third area is looking to strengthen systems to support vulnerable and increase resilience. And that's where the government can work on developing a shock-sensitive safety net system, which can help mitigate the impact of both the current shock as well as future shocks. And that's where it can really look at, again, the more efficient use of limited funds to support the poor through cash transfers, which can be more efficient. So with that, let me stop and hand over to my colleague, Nima. Thank you.
Malawi faces an infrastructure investment gap in the energy and water and sanitation sectors of approximately $332 million per year. What are the pathways to increase investments in energy and water infrastructure in Malawi? Join us as we launch the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, doing more with less, improving service delivery in energy and water. Catch us on Tuesday, December 15, 2020, live on Zodiak television.
Patrick Hedinga joining us virtually live from New York. He was making the first part of the presentation of the Malawi Economic Monitor 2020, titled Doing More with Less, Improving Service Delivery in Energy and Water. Like indicated, there are two presenters that are joining us, and the next presenter to complement on what Patrick has presented is Nima Mwingu, who is Senior Financial Sector Specialist with the World Bank. Nima equally joins us virtually, this time from Nairobi. So we cross over to Nairobi to join Nima Mwingu.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nima Mwingu. I'm going to take us through the special topic. So under the special topic, we are putting forward recommendations on how the government can improve service delivery and infrastructure investments in the energy and water sectors in the context of limited resources by becoming more efficient and also leveraging alternative sources of financing, more specifically from the private sector. The government has been underinvesting in energy and water infrastructure. Also, the limit. Public investment that has been made in the past 20 years, it has averaged about 4.2% of GDP annually. At the same time, a similar level of investment is needed in the energy sector annually, around $332 million in both energy and water sectors. So, required. Just to touch a little bit more on the challenges in the PIM, Public Investment Management Framework and institutions. One is how projects are being selected. There is limited cost-benefit analysis to justify projects, and this is contributing to limited budgets to do more critical investments, and also budget cuts for ongoing projects, leading to arrears, delayed project implementation, etc. The other issues that require attention is the consideration of private sector financing as an option upfront when projects are being selected. And this is not really being done at the moment in a very structured way. And what is happening is that the government is ending up with a very large program of investment with too many projects that are competing for limited public funds. On top of that, it means that the government is not generating a list of projects that could potentially be further explored either for PPPs or for commercial finance. Linked to that is the limited capacity of the government to develop projects because of private investors considering investing in public projects. Non-compliance of procurement rules is really costing the government. It is leading to a situation where the government is not getting value for money. Project implementation delays are happening because of selection of non-competent contractors, etc. The second main issue is the inefficiency of SOEs that are delivering infrastructure in the country. Most of them, they have weak performance. Some of them cannot even fully cover operational costs, which is very important, especially for commercial SOEs. They should be able to cover operational costs. Bailouts of SOEs have been common in the past. This has further drained the fiscal space. And because of poor performance, it means that SOEs are not creditworthy and are not able to leverage commercial finance because of limited borrowing capacity. Just to highlight a little bit more in terms of the challenges the external reasons, governance is a key issue. What we are seeing And when they are, especially we are seeing this in the water sector, they are not necessarily linked to performance. There isn't an independent regulator in the water sector who can ensure that there is a structured tariff adjustment system that is formula-based and that is linked to performance. The SOEs that we've looked at in the energy and water sectors, they have a lot of outstanding unpaid bills, sometimes accounting up to 18% of their total assets, which is quite substantial. And also a substantial part of that relates to unpaid bills by the government. And really this is creating liquidity challenges within it. The problem. So there is this vicious cycle of non-performance, expectation to be bailed out, etc. On the other set of reasons, there is limited management capacity and also the lack of commercial mindset and drive to make change within the institutions, of course, partly attributable to how management is being hired and also the quality of, of the boards. And also there is limited staff with administration. We see higher administrative costs, inefficient operations on simple things like doing billing correctly on time, collections, etc. And also, if you look at the program of investments of SOE, some of them are very large and unrealistic and they haven't been prioritized. And that kind of diverts the attention to critical programs that should be implemented. Now, moving on to recommendations. Recommendations under this topic are anchored on two main pillars. One is to upgrade the PIM framework and integrate it with the PPP program, because PPP is a form of public procurement. So integrating these two is very critical for the government to also be able to leverage opportunities in the private sector. The second one is ensuring that SOEs are more efficient, they are credit worthy, and thereby are able to increase investment and also minimize the drain on the fiscal space. Now, just to illustrate on the first pillar, how this could potentially work in practice. When ministries, departments, and agencies are putting together concepts of projects to propose for finance, they should be required to justify why the project is needed, what is the socioeconomic benefit of the project, what is the cost, what are the potential financing options, and whether private sector financing as an option has been considered after. And some of these reforms that are already assessment, then that can happen. If not, then they are either rejected or returned back to MDAs to work on them. Now, this process is going to result into three sets of sub-programs. One sub-program could be earmarked for public funding, another for PPP implementation, and another where these projects have commercial viability. They could be earmarked for a full commercial finance. Now, this process certainly is going to require a reform commitment from the key PIM institutions, capacity building of MDS so that they can begin to do this re-engineering process correctly and to sustain it, and also financial resources for developing projects. Project development can be quite costly. It can actually cost between 5 to 10% of the total project cost to really develop a project to the full. Now, we understand that the government is already serious about this and they are considering reforms. This financial year, they've set up aside about 500 million kwacha for project preparation. But of course, it is quite a small amount in the context of the resources that might be required to support this. Obviously, in different countries, there are different ways of doing this. Some countries have fully funded this from tax In certain countries, they have done that in a concerted way together with other financiers, including development. On the second pillar, really there is a need of that reforms by ease without necessarily infringing on their autonomy to make business decisions. And for example, the government can make certain decisions to motivate, first of all, to ensure boards are professional, they are accountable, there is a framework for evaluating them. Competent CEOs are hired to develop key turnaround strategies, which actually the government now requires SOEs to come up with turnaround strategies so that they can improve the performance. Other reforms by the government can also begin to pave the way for the private sector to come in and get involved in projects or as investors, and that can also bring some private sector efficiency and also financial discipline, which usually comes with engaging with the private sector. Just to highlight a little bit more in terms of the kind of incentives and reforms that the government can undertake at the macro level, really some of these apply across all SOEs. At the macro level, it's extremely important for the government to, one, rationalize the state ownership in SOEs, and define expectations that it wants to get out of SOEs, including what kind of public policy objectives it wants SOEs to meet, and also define how it wants to interact with them without necessarily interfering or infringing on their autonomy. Now, this can be defined in sort of an overall, the government is already thinking about that. And the policy would definitely need to be implemented through a legal instrument. One of the things that can be done here is that where it is clear there isn't really a rationale for state ownership in an SOE, which could be the case. In Malawi, there are 67 SOEs in the country. The government could begin to retreat and also allow more of private sector involvement in certain SOEs. Board independence, professionalism, and accountability is very critical. And this really has to start with how boards are being appointed. It has to be merit-based. They have to have a mix of skills that are necessary to make sure the SOEs are being governed correctly. And there has to be an accountability framework with clear targets for performance and evaluation process. Ensuring that tariffs are properly regulated, they are regularly adjusted, and they are linked to performance is also very important. The issue of arrears, it's extremely important for the government to sort out. And we understand the government is really serious about this. But there are substantial arrears, and it's really constraining SOEs from making certain investments. So paying the bills on time, clearing arrears that are already there, it's very necessary to pay attention to. Now, once the government has made these reforms and paved the way for SOEs to actually be able to perform well, there shouldn't be an expectation by SOEs to be bailed out. The government can actually decide to implement a no bailout policy as a point of departure. On top of that, we are also seeing some, moral hazard when it comes to issuing of guarantees that does not necessarily motivate a performance improvement. Of course, guarantees usually are always justified, but they should not be given to failing SOEs or the ones that where you see a clear pathway to default. And there should be criteria on how to issue guarantees, etc. And we are having a couple of recommendations in the report. Lastly, certainly SOEs have a big role to play. There are things that they can begin to do to improve efficiency and credit worthiness. without necessarily waiting for those external reforms to take place. For example, we have done an analysis, of course, of the 2 SOEs in the energy sector and 3 SOE water boards in the water sector, and it is showing that potentially about 62 billion kwacha could be saved annually by these SOEs are doing very simple internal reforms. For example, becoming efficient in the way they are doing billing and collection, reducing commercial losses, cutting fats in the admin cost, etc. This could really make a huge difference. And the government needs to expect this from SOEs. That's one. Even the regulatory assets in the investment, but this is existing in the water sector, and it's very important to be addressed. So I've come to the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I will hand over back to the moderator for discussion. Thank you.
Malawi faces an infrastructure investment gap in the energy and water and sanitation sectors of approximately $332 million per year. What are the pathways to increase investments in energy and water infrastructure in Malawi? Join us as we launch the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, Doing More with Less, Improving Service Delivery in Energy and Water. Catch us on Tuesday, December 15, 2020, live on Zodiak Television, Zodiak Online, and on YouTube at exactly 3 p.m. Live in our studios will be Dr. Max Wenga, Deputy Director for Planning in the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources, Lauren Nyasulu, President of Economics Association of Malawi, ECAMA, and Joseph Kalowekamo, Deputy Director of Alternative Energy in the Ministry of Energy. Doing more with less, improving service delivery in energy and water.
Well, we're back in studio to take the last part of the launch of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor. Thank you so much to Nima Mwengu. He's a senior financial sector specialist from the World Bank. You heard her present the second part of this report earlier. We were joined live from New York by Patrick Hettinger, all of them, all the 2 experts joining us virtually, but apologies for some of the hiccups experienced with our connectivity there. But if you missed some sections of the report, don't worry. I have a high-powered panel in studio joining me live now to dissect and dig into some aspects of this report and try to interpret some of these things. These are economists that were working on this report, but we have now the other experts to try and interpret and dissect into the contents of the report. And quickly, let me welcome our panel in studio. I have next to me Dr. Max Wenga. Dr. Max, I hope you don't mind, Dr. Max.
That's right.
Fine. He's Deputy Director of Planning in the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources. And next to him is Lauren Nyasulu. Lauren is President of the Economics Association of Malawi, ECAMA. Welcome, Lauren. And on my far right is Joseph Kalowekamo. Joseph Kalowekamo is Deputy Director of Alternative Energy in the Ministry of Energy. The gentleman and the lady, welcome. You followed the presentation of the report. Maybe quickly let me start with your preamble, Dr. Wenga. You have followed the report. It is obviously pointing out gaps that we have in the energy and water sectors and proposing solutions on what we need to do as a country. Let me hear your thoughts in the first place, but also whether there is anything that Malawi needs to prioritize in addressing those gaps.
Thank you, Daniel. Let me start by commending the World Bank for focusing its Malawi economic monitor this time on these key sectors of water and energy. You see, frankly speaking, the prominence of these sectors only comes out strongly when we have a crisis. But as a matter of fact, these two key sectors are the enablers of the economy. And in fact, an investment in water, for instance, we immediately see the positive outcomes in the agriculture, tourism, health, just to name a few. So coming to the issue of what should we prioritize, I do strongly believe that as a country, we need to give priority to the reforms that will enhance efficiencies. Because by doing so, that's I think the strategic way to do more with less. You might be glad to learn that the reforms that the colleagues from the World Bank have proposed, which I really support, a couple of them in the government we already undertaking. I'll just give a quick example of the water boards. Right now, almost all the water boards are now moving away from the use of postpaid meters to the prepaid, which I think would be like bring a lot of savings. No longer chasing bills, no longer having those huge debts. So that's one of the issues that we could do, I think, to enhance the efficiencies. So it means that they are done.
Thank you so much. That was Dr. Maxwell, Maxwell Wenga sharing with us insights into what this entails and what more reforms can the government engage to improve service delivery, particularly, mind you, two critical sectors, energy and water resources. Let me go to Lorraine Yasuru, ECAMA president. Makes recommendations on what government could complement to strengthen the foundations that have already been set for macro stability, fiscal stimulus and growth. I want to understand your take on these two critical issues and if there is anything more that we can do to improve the situation.
Thank you very much, Dan. And thanks to the World Bank for this timely theme, especially now at this time. It's really important to make sure as a country we do more with the little that we have. Let me be quick to point out that as a country, we've had a stable macroeconomic environment for some time. But let me also say that the ordinary Malawian has not been able to fully benefit from this stable macroeconomic environment because of the different shocks that have hit the economy time and time again. So if we look at where we are now, we are at a point that as a country, we are experiencing COVID impacts that are affecting the economy. We have rising public debt. We have declining revenues. All these are major challenges that the economy is grappling with. And fiscal sustainability has become a key issue for the economy to be able to focus on. So clearly, when we talk about fiscal sustainability, we cannot avoid talking about expenditure prioritization. And this is one of the recommendations that has been provided by the World Bank. But I would just want to emphasize on it, on the need for it, and just to give a very clear example, probably, to appreciate the need for this expenditure prioritization. I'll take you to the agriculture sector. First of all, broadly, as an economy, we really need expenditure prioritization, especially bringing the balance between short-term investments and long-term investments. If I take you to the agriculture sector, this one is critical because performance of the sector largely determines performance of the entire economy. So if we look at this sector, it has consistently been able to get a minimum of 10% budget allocation, which is required, on the understanding and hope that we'll be they are able to attain the targeted growth of 6%. But the sector has consistently failed to attain this minimum growth of 6%. And over the years, we've also seen that productivity has been declining, and as well, even employment in the sector has been going down. So why am I saying this? I think it's important for us to realize that if we're doing all that needs to be done in terms of financing the sector and we're not getting the desired results, it means there's something that we're not doing right. So we cannot continue on the path that we are on now. We've done subsidies for quite some time. We are still doing them now, just in a different form and shape and name. But I think it's important that we start making some hard choices as a country on how we're going to progress. Currently, if you look at the current budget, the 2020-2021 budget, we have an allocation of about 178 billion to Affordable Inputs Program. This is done on the belief and hope that we'll be able to improve productivity, which translates into increased production as well as improved incomes. But if you look at irrigation development, it's an area that is quite critical in terms of boosting productivity as well, but even building the resilience that we need as an economy. Irrigation development, if we look at resources from government, it has about 1.5 billion. So you have 178 billion being allocated to short-term and recurrent expenditures aimed at improving productivity. But when it comes to long-term investment aimed at improving productivity, you have 1.5 billion. The imbalance there is quite huge. And as a country, I think we need to start making hard choices, because the short-term recurrent expenditures that we are making, they need to be supported by a strong long-term investments on infrastructure and the systems that we need as a country. So one point I want to emphasize is the need for us to balance short-term expenditures and long-term investments. This area we're not doing very well in, and we need to improve.
Lorraine, I'll take you back to the issue of tough choices. I mean, everyone agrees it's tough times requiring tough choices. And I did ask earlier the acting country manager, Mr. Javier, about some of the tough choices that we must take. I want to put it back to you again. What are some of these tough choices we must take as a nation?
Okay, the issue is we have a very limited, a small resource envelope, and we have very limited fiscal space as a country. So in terms of expenditure, we need to be quite critical to make sure we're spending on things that are going to stimulate the growth of the economy. So these are the hard choices that we have to make, because sometimes we are tempted to do so much, but in terms of the returns that we're going to get at the end of the day, you find that the impact is very little. And that's why the example that I've just given of the agriculture sector, we've been putting in resources, but in terms of what we get at the end of the day in terms of returns, it has been quite dismal. And as a country,
we're losing now.
Exactly. So we're almost like gambling with billions of kwachas every year, when we can do a lot more in terms of building the structure of this economy, investing in infrastructure, which is quite critical at this point.
Well, thank you so much, Lorraine. Let me go to Mr. Joseph Kalwekam from the energy perspective. The MEM clearly states out what are our challenges and the issues in the energy sector, and also proposes some of the solutions. But I would like to get if there are any more solutions that you would propose from your perspective, sir.
Thank you very much, Dan, for that. To begin with, let me thank the World Bank Group for preparing this comprehensive Malawi Economic Monitor, which also touches on the energy sector, which is a driver for the economy. I'm happy to see that what the bank has identified as challenges are also the ones that us in the energy sector have identified. And we do also agree to the proposed reforms to address those constraints. Now, if you ask me as to what should be done, what should be prioritized, much as the government, the private sector, or the investors can do. The thing should be thrown in the first place to the state-owned enterprises. I'm basically talking about Egenco and ESCOM. And I'll focus more on ESCOM because Egenco somehow is doing fine, but there are issues with ESCOM.
Egenco is doing fine?
Egenco is somehow doing fine.
Okay.
Financially. They're struggling, yes.
Right.
But ESCOM is worse. So I like the second pillar, which has been presented in the report, that we need to ensure that state-owned enterprises are more efficient and credit-worthy. Now, focusing on ESCOM, we need to improve financial performance of ESCOM. ESCOM has been struggling of late, and it has been worse in the past 3 years. There are a number of issues that could be attributed to this, but the most important one is the tariff deficit. The electricity tariff is not cost reflective, and this has affected ESCOM's finances. So there is need to frequently adjust the tariff, and this should depend on the economic fundamentals and also the key performance indicators. I think if this is done, revenue collection by ESCOM will increase. Credit worthiness of ESCOM will also increase. But for this to be sustainable, we also need to have a board of directors for ESCOM that are effective. Even the management of ESCOM should also be effective. And this tariff adjustment is also linked to private sector participation. To improve delivery of energy services, there's need for private sector participation in the energy sector. And the private sector can be attracted if the tariff is competitive, if the tariff is cost effective. And the creditworthiness of ESCOM, in this case, will also attract private sector participation, because ESCOM will now be able to borrow and also be able to invest in infrastructure, and this will give some confidence to the private sector. So that's what I can say.
Two key things there: credit worthiness at ESCOM, and then getting them to adjust tariffs. The people watching us, the consumers, people that are looking for electricity, that 10 to 11% are saying, how do you adjust electricity tariffs when we don't have electricity, for instance? That must be a very difficult balance that you are presenting today here.
That is very true, Daniel. It's a hard decision that has to be made, because we may want to increase the tariff in order to improve ESCOM's financial performance, and at the same time attract private sector participation. But how can we do that if people are not happy with the service delivery by ESCOM? So this is a hard decision that we have to make. But what should be known by our viewers is that our tariff is very low and it's not competitive and cannot attract private sector participation. So it's a hard pill to swallow, but we have to live with it. We just have to make a hard decision to increase the tariffs and then improve performance of ESCOM and also attract private sector participation.
Thank you so much. That was Mr. Joseph Kalowekamo from the Ministry of Energy. Let me go back to you, Dr. Maxwell Wenga. The Malawi Economic Monitor is proposing a number of things in terms of capacity of government to invest in infrastructure, including the efficiency of project selection. I wanted to find out, with regard to the water sector, for example, what other viable options does the government have in this regard, investing in infrastructure?
Well, thank you, Daniel. Actually, very glad that you've also touched on the issue of financing in the infrastructure. You see, in the water sector, water and sanitation projects, they have unique form in the sense that most of them, they really require a huge, substantial amount of resources. And this happens at the time when also as government, we're faced with budget constraint and we have to do as much as possible with the few resources that we have. This is also why we are so grateful to the development partners like the World Bank that have come forward and supported us. That's really commendable. So with regards to what else can we do, you see, it's an issue that requires a good financing model, a model that should open up, that would somehow also relate to the area presentations. We're looking at a situation where we should give room to the private sector to play a role, and I'm glad to report that already we have the private sector participating. For instance, you were of several borehole drilling companies taking their role, providing water. That's quite commendable. Of course, I should be quick also to make an appeal to the private sector partners that we are very happy with the excellent service that you are doing, but we appeal that at least on the standards and quality, there we should not compromise, because when we talk about water, we're talking about life, and we really want water that is of high quality, acceptable to drink. So just to add a little more, that beyond this, as a sector, we are also open to the PPPs, that is public-private partnerships, to allow other actors to come and take their role together with the government. My friend from Energy talked about tariff adjustments. We are kind of in a similar situation in the water.
Is this something you are considering too?
You know that delivering the water service really involves a lot of processes, and those are costly. We try, of course, to balance up as well, as you say, that this is water's life, it should be affordable, but also the water boards should be able to meet their cost of operations. And as well, you know, when they're operating at that level, then they'll also be able to invest some into development projects. So yes, so we are looking forward that water should be accessible from Sanje to Chitipa, Nchinji to Nkota. As you know, the area statement by the country manager of the World Bank that close to 30% cannot access potable water. I think it's a concern to us in the government. Would want 100% access and also make water available for industrial use. So yes, we're trying our best to provide this accommodative financing model. Yes, Dan.
I mean, we look so heavily reliant on partners like the World Bank, and now we have the private sector that's coming in. Clearly, most of the things that we hear around our water boards are the maladministration issues, you know, mismanagement of funds, and then they come back to complain we need more funding to invest in infrastructure. We are talking reforms now. Do you think they need to be pounded deep in the water boards?
Oh yes, you know, Dan, right now it's not business as usual. I would assure you that all the water boards are really running on their toes to make sure they have these turnaround strategies. And really, the vision is that all the water boards should be profit making. We don't want to hear further losses and stuff. And the issues of maladministration, all those things not to feature anymore. So even the boards that have newly instituted, they're really working hard to ensure, because they also have to report back and they really want to see the change on the ground. So yes, really there have been those progress, but a change you'll be seen very soon.
So the people following us, the people watching us on Zodiak Television, Facebook Live, and YouTube, this is a panel discussion, the tip of the launch of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor. You just heard from Dr. Wenga from the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it's clear, it's an assurance. He says from the water boards, it's business unusual. That's right. You say reforming to ensure there is a better service delivery, to ensure those of you watching us and don't have access to water, that 30% population, to ensure you have access to water. Now, let me go back to Lolori Nyasulu, President of ECAMA. We are still in the middle of a devastating pandemic, COVID-19. The economy is on its toes. Of course, in July we were saying, the 11th edition was saying, we're trying to recover. Have we recovered? What do we need to get us to a recovery mode where we can begin to talk about growth?
Well done. Thank you very much. We definitely have not yet recovered. I think we still have a long way to go because COVID-19 is still around us. But in terms of what needs to be done to boost the recovery process, one key thing, I think I have to talk in terms of the short term and in the medium term. The country needs a strong macro-fiscal anchor. Fiscal policy needs to be growth promoting and growth sustaining. Currently, we're in a situation where we're implementing expansionary fiscal policy, but we have rising public debt. This situation is not good for the economy. And therefore, having a strong macro-fiscal anchor is urgent. And let me also point out that having a strong macro-fiscal anchor requires credible budget estimates. So in the past, we have seen that we've had very optimistic and very ambitious revenue projections. This has affected budget implementation because all the expenditures premised on high and highly ambitious revenue projections. So we need to restore the credible budget targets moving forward if we are to attain this. But also the issue of hard choices on reining expenditures has to be emphasized. But on top of that, we also need to have a strong accountability framework on the expenditures that we're going to be managing. And on the same, in the short term, we need to act with resolve on corruption. Research has shown that African governments, Malawi inclusive, they lose about 30% of their national budgets to corruption. If you can just imagine that and look at our current budget, you're talking about over 600 billion kwacha. And that's a significant amount of money, which if corruption is curbed effectively, we can have a lot of resources released in the system that can contribute to the development of this country. Moving a bit medium term, I think we'll have to, as a country, broaden the tax base. And this calls for improving efficiency in tax collection. We know initiatives are already there currently to improve efficiency in the tax collection, but also initiatives to incorporate part of the informal sector, to formalize it a little bit, because the informal sector is quite large. But government will have to really think and act in trying to make sure that we incorporate part of it into the formal sector. The house will have to be looked at, but it's important to start thinking and moving towards that direction. And finally, on this point, in terms of in the medium term, it's important for the country to work towards building resilience around common shocks, the shocks that hit the economy time and time again. We need to build resilience to ensure that the economy, the growth and the development can be sustained for a long time. And having a stable growth and development of the economy is also critical for building investor confidence. And this is something that we need as a country moving forward.
And let me proceed to Mr. Kalowekamo. Dr. Marx did indicate, allude to the fact that they're in the middle of inadequate resources, and then the issue of gaps in the investment. I'm sure that's almost a similar situation as well in the energy sector. We have been stuck with the very same power generation plants for decades now. Is there anything more we can do factoring in the private sector?
Exactly, Dan. I think this is what we need. As I talked earlier on, we need private sector participation in the power industry. Yes, government can put a little something into the sector. A GENCO, ESCOM can do something, but it's very limited because energy projects are capital intensive. So we really need to leverage private sector participation, private sector investment in the power industry. But that said, it's high time that we have relied too much on the donors as grants, concessional loans. Yes, we're talking about the private sector. But as government, I think we're also able to do a little something. I will start an example of the 64 megawatt Kapichira phase 2 was financed using government-owned resources. So much as we wait for contribution from the private sector, as government, let's also put a little something that we can use. There's a low-hanging fruit, the Malawi-Zambia interconnector, which can contribute to the supply of electricity in the country. I think this is something that you can consider for financing using government's own resources. But the bottom line is...
And we already have infrastructure.
Infrastructure for...
transmit the energy.
Internally in the country, yes, we do have. But with our neighboring countries, we do not have that infrastructure. Okay. We have plans which are at an advanced stage to construct the Malawi-Mozambique interconnector. And we have in the pipeline the Malawi-Zambia interconnector. And the Malawi-Zambia interconnector, this is the one I'm citing that probably this one we can consider using government-owned resources. Yes, private sector can come in to support, but let's do more with the little that we have. So let's leverage private sector participation in the power industry.
I mean, you just brought in Malawi-Mozambique interconnector. That's been close to a decade now. Will there be life on that one from your perspective? I know there is a political perspective, but from the ministry, as technocrats in the ministry.
Yes, let me assure you, Dan, and our viewers out there that the Malawi-Mozambique interconnector is on course. Funds were already identified. Currently, procurement of an engineering procurement and construction company is at an advanced stage. And if all goes on well, the line should be operational by mid-2023. And with that line in place, we should be able to import, for a start, about 50 megawatt from the region, especially from Mozambique. But we can increase to maybe 250, 200 from the region. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kalowekamo. I was going to go back to Lorraine, but reserve that for your final remarks. But there's something quite interesting. So we have a lot of people following this discussion live on Zodiak Television, Facebook Live, but also on our YouTube channel. We have very intriguing discussions. If you can quickly go on there and share your thoughts, ask questions. The World Bank has experts to respond to them. But a quick one for Lorraine. Chipo Msoya joining us and says, thanks to Lorraine for good articulation on agriculture. A quick follow-up in agriculture. The biggest expenditure item has always been input subsidies. Do we then deduce that underperformance in agriculture points to the need for significant reforms on input subsidies? I know you did touch on that one earlier.
Okay, thank you very much to our viewers, and thank you for that question. On the issue of underperformance, you have tied it directly to the input subsidies. And the point we're trying to put forward here is that as much as we need the subsidies in the short term, the country needs to strike a balance with investments in the long term. So if you look at irrigation alone, for instance, we're saying from domestic resources, government has committed about 1.5 billion. But from foreign resources, we have around 38 billion. So this added together gives you about 40 billion. If you take allocation to affordable inputs alone, it's 178 billion. What we're saying is, let's strike the balance if we are to attain meaningful growth that can be sustained over a long period of time. Because if government can allocate 178 billion to affordable inputs program, it certainly can be able to match the investment that foreign resources are committing to irrigation, which is coming up to around 40 billion in total, adding on to the contribution from government. So we should be able to strike this balance moving forward if we are to build resilience in the economy and ensure that our economy goes on the right path.
So, I mean, in a way, you agree with Chipo that the underperformance in the agriculture sector has a bearing to the or cause for so much significant need for reforms in the subsidy.
Certainly it does, and these are the areas that need to start being looked at and see how best we can restructure and reform our financing in the agriculture sector.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. We should be winding up this launch of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, courtesy of the World Bank. I will ask my panel to quickly make 1 minute closing remarks, beginning with Dr. Marx.
Thank you, Dan. My closing remark is that as we talk about the reforms, let's not forget about mindset change. If we don't change our minds, none of these reforms will materialize. The Vice President already made a detailed presentation about mindset change. So that's what I would say. Let's all change our minds and make Malawi better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Dr. Max Wenga, Deputy Director of Planning in the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources. And Lorraine, let's hear your concluding thoughts.
Thank you very much, Dan. From me, I would say we need policies and strategies in place that will encourage citizen participation in the development of this country. Malawi's development needs to be owned by Malawians. We need the participation of Malawians in production, manufacturing, service delivery. We cannot afford to have a passive citizenry that sits at home and waits for subsidies and welfare handouts of any kind. We need to be actively involved. Thank you, Dan.
We need to be actively involved. Handouts won't take us anywhere. Finally, from the panel, Mr. Kaluekamo.
Thank you very much, Daniel. In conclusion, let me say that the proposed reforms by the World Bank Group are in line, like I said earlier on, with government's commitment to implementing reforms in the energy sector. And this will contribute towards increasing access to electricity. As the acting country director said earlier on, our current access to electricity is at 11%. And if these reforms are implemented effectively, we should be able to move to about 15.6%, that's our target, by 2022, and to 30% by 2030. And I'm talking about 30%, this is for grid connection. But if you also consider off-grid solutions, standalone systems, then we should be at 30% by 2030, which is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. So let me assure Malawians that we would try as much as possible in the energy sector to continue implementing the reforms that we have in the sector and also the ones that have been proposed by the bank.
Thank you so much. That was Mr. Joseph Kaluekamo, Deputy Director of Alternative Energy in the Ministry of Energy. I also had Lorraine Nyasulu, President of the Economics Association of Malawi, and Dr. Max Wenga, Deputy Director of Planning in the Ministry of Natural Resources. Thank you so much, colleagues, for making time to come to join us. It's been a pleasure to have you live in studio.
Thank you.
That's it from us, and in a moment, stay with us, because briefly I'm going to be joined by Mr. Ephraim Chirima, who is private sector specialist at the World Bank, to give us concluding remarks. In case you were just joining us, or you found us midway, we were launching the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor by the World Bank. This is the second for this year alone. For this year, the first one came sometime back in July. We're going to take a short break and join Mr. Chirima for concluding remarks.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And water and sanitation sectors of approximately $332 million per year. What are the pathways to increase investments in energy and water infrastructure in Malawi? Join us as we launch the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor, doing more with less, improving service delivery in energy and water. Catch us on Tuesday, December 15, 2020, live on Zodiak Television, Zodiak Online, and on YouTube at exactly 3 p.m. Live in our studios will be Dr. Max Wenga, Deputy Director for Planning in the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources, Lorraine Nyasulu, President of Economics Association of Malawi, ECAMA, and Joseph Kaloekamo, Deputy Director of Alternative Energy in the Ministry of Energy. Doing more with less, improving service delivery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. My role is to give a closing remark on this important occasion when we launch the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor. Allow me to just say 3-4 things which I can pick from the discussions that was there today before I give the closing remark very quickly. I pick from the discussions that one is that we have very few resources, and out of those resources there's need to prioritize. I take it that government is also confirmed through its delegation here that they are going to take some of the recommendations here, if not most of them. Although some of them they're already working on them, but I think they will take a lot of recommendations from here. We also understand that there is strong need to change some of the SOE governance as recommended by the Economic Monitor. So I just picked those three as a preamble to a speech which I would like to speak now from a written text, but very quickly. On behalf of the World Bank, I would like to thank everyone for joining the presentation and the discussion today as we share to everyone the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor. I believe we together, including the panelists, have touched on many important topics, one of which is that we recognize the economy has been severely impacted this year, mostly by the COVID. And I think the evidence is there. The GDP that has been mentioned in the Economic Monitor is going to grow by 1%. But that has got implications that the GDP per capita, the real income per person, has actually shrunk. So there's a lot of work to be done there. The question is, what should be done? The first is to strengthen the foundation for the macro stability. I think Lorraine also mentioned that from the Economics Association. There's need to critically look at the fiscal deficit. There's also need for further diversification for the agriculture to non-agriculture sectors. I think issue of irrigation has been mentioned here, and strengthen systems for support for vulnerabilities, especially those who have been affected by COVID. I think we've also noted the issue of the country suffering from significant debt burden. The fiscal space is very little, but yet we need service improvement in energy and water. The question is, what should be done? I think the monitor comes up with a number of areas, but first looking at the weaknesses in public investment management. To strengthen that area, there are a number of areas, I think, that have been also mentioned in the economic monitor. But also this SOE efficiency, creditworthy, and improving their financial and operational performance, as well as their governance. I think these have been well mentioned in the economic monitor, including the discussions here. Let me finalize by saying, as the World Bank, we remain committed to help Malawi strengthen its economic development, to reduce poverty, and deliver better services to the people of the country. In closing, we would like to thank everyone for their participation today, especially our discussants over there, our moderator, Zodiak, for hosting this event. Thank you very much, everyone.
And also from us at Zodiac, it's thank you very much. You could make time to join us on this memorable occasion of the launch of the 12th edition of the Malawi Economic Monitor by the World Bank. That was Ephraim Chirima. He's a private sector specialist at World Bank Malawi office. Now, in case you missed much of the discussion here, you can rush to the World Bank website. You will find the report is now posted there live. Otherwise, from the rest of the crew, I already thanked our panel earlier. My name is Daniel Mawara. Till next time, it's bye-bye. Okay.